Our next speaker is Fred Tomaselli. He's talking about my Chemical Sublime. I'm hesitating to use the word talk, because although he'll be speaking, he's an artist, a visual artist, and so you're going to see a beautiful array of his beautiful artwork. Fred Tomaselli has had numerous solo exhibitions, including the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth and the University of Michigan Museum of Art, survey exhibitions, and has toured 4 venues in Europe. His works, he's been at the Whitney Museum of Modern Art, for example. His works have been included in international biennial exhibitions, including Sydney, Santa Fe, the Whitney, and others. His work can be found in public collections or institutions such as the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA. I'm going to turn you over to Fred Tomaselli to tell us about psychedelic art. Fred.
Thanks for coming so early in the morning. I grew up in the shadow of Disneyland, so that basically every night around 9 o'clock, I would look up into the sky and see Tinkerbell flying through the air amid the fireworks bursting about her. And I thought that was normal, or I didn't have anything to compare it to, at least. And this idea of, like, I guess I grew up very comfortable with this idea of immersive artificial reality. And so much so that, like, when I saw my first actual real waterfall, I was looking for the pumps and the conduit that were running it. And when I found out that it was actually just water coming off of a mountain, it blew my mind. And so for me, I guess, you know, unreality was almost the realest thing there was. And so basically, I moved to New York in 1985, and I started putting this sort of like this past behind me, and trying to figure out what it meant. I mean, I grew up in this sort of like mall culture. I was basically a stoner, which is basically a hippie without ideology. I mean, I grew up with, you know, in the 70s, which is basically the 60s with birth defects. And so instead of I don't know, instead of moving for transcendence, I think we, my friends and myself, settled for oblivion. And so anyway, I came to New York, and the first thing I did was I stopped being a painter. I guess I felt like very burdened by the history of painting, and I just didn't feel like I could do anything with the media that would be relevant to my life. So I began doing a lot of installations and performance works. I'm going to show you just one to give you a context for the work that came after. This is a work called Cubic Sky. Let me see if I can make this work. It was basically what I did was I took a map of the heavens, circular, stretched it out into a square, gridded up the square into 30 units, and then folded them up onto themselves, thereby containerizing the infinite. These are these little plexiglass boxes with lights in the inside, and each one of these facets slavishly demarcates a facet of the universe. At the time, I was thinking that man looking up into the heavens was the oldest way that I could think of him turning himself back on his back to the world. And I wanted to both deliver an escapist experience while simultaneously commenting on that experience. And I guess I was utilizing the tropes that I found in theme parks, specifically in Disneyland, and these things that I had kind of grown up around. And then anyway, so I'm not going to show you, I did a ton of installations. That piece, by the way, is currently being shown at Mass MoCA until April, so if you ever want to see it, it's there. But then that kind of led to, like, you know, for 10 years I did all this stuff, and then I started doing these little drawings that were coming out of plein air drawings. I was a Sunday painter. I I didn't really believe that, what I was doing as an artist was really, as a painter, was very interesting. But I started doing these little maps. This is, I don't know if, oh yeah, this was every rock band I can remember seeing. This kind of comes out of Cubic Sky. And you can see it's sort of like maybe two lobes of a mind, two sides of a brain coming together. That also then led to another work called Every Rock Band I Can Remember Seeing Mixed with Every Vertebrae in North America that's become extinct since 1492. I know it's a long title. But it was about seeing and not seeing, about nature and culture. It was about, it was also maybe positioning my own personal hedonism within the context of a world that was falling apart around me. But then that led to what I call chemical celestial portraits. What I ended up doing was I would give my friends questionnaires where I would ask them to list every drug they could remember taking and to give me their birth date. The birth date would correspond to an astrological or astronomical sign that would then correspond to an astrological location. And then what I would do is I'd put pills and sugar on photographic paper and expose it to light in a photogram process, a cameraless photographic process, and then relabel the stars with every drug they took. So they became chemical celestial portraits of inner space and outer space. That then led to this is just my 12 friends in the 12 houses of the zodiac. And as you can see, it kind of relates maybe to Cubic Sky insofar as I'm chopping up the infinite and bracketing it. But anyway, so those, I guess, were my first sort of forays into two-dimensional art after a long hiatus. And I started thinking about paintings, and I started thinking, like, what are paintings for? And I started thinking about how the rhetoric around psychedelic drugs mirrored a lot of the pre-modernist ideals around art. This idea of losing yourself in the sublime world that was represented within the painting. This idea of a painting as a transportational vehicle to take you to other dimensions. This notion of the transcendent or sublime space within paintings. And I started thinking, like, that was extremely uncanny, and I couldn't understand why nobody was making those kinds of connections. Because, the art world is a very secular place, and I think psychedelics are kind of agents of mystery that sort of upend a sort of like sense of rigor among like many conceptual artists. But for me, being an artist, it's all about thinking about perception. It's all about mining the ideas around perception. So for me, it was a very salient idea to explore. It was also something that had a lot of personal meaning to me, and was very responsible for not just for the shape I was in, but for the shape that the world was in a funny way. So anyway, I have this background as a surfboard maker. Like I said, I grew up in Southern California. And I then had this idea to like inlay drugs into plywood and then resin them over to sort of preserve their water-soluble, ephemeral qualities so that instead of going through the bloodstream to alter consciousness, they travel through the eyes. So it's a different route to altering perception. So this is one of the first works I made. It was a piece I made in 1990 called Big as Me. And it's a spinal cord made out of Tylenol and aspirin, and as big as me. And then that led to this work here called 13,000, which is 13,000 aspirin what I did was I routed slots into this plywood, stacked it with aspirin and resined it over. So anyway, I started thinking, well, okay, so I'm working with pharmacological culture, so over-the-counter drugs. I wanted to put some subcultural drugs in, because for me, whether it was like pharmacological culture, or it was about drug subculture. It was all about changing your reality. If you had a headache, you took an aspirin, it went away. That was altering consciousness. If you smoked a joint and got a little happy, again, it was the same. To me, it was the same thing. So I started growing pot, and this is one of the first works I made called X Will Fade. This piece here, I knew that the leaves would change color over time. And so initially I painted all the leaves about the color that they were in real life, except for the X, and it formed over time. But the thing about pot, when I started putting marijuana into the work, it didn't just put like subcultural or agents that connoted subcultural relationships. It also put the shape of nature into my work. And then that actually became the biggest aspect of, like, when I started putting the kind of soft forms of the leaves against the hard geometries of drug manufacturers, I really liked the friction that was there. So, but I also, had a lot of fun playing around with things. This is a work called I Could See Your Voice, and it basically deals with synesthesia and this idea of like the visualization of sound. And I was thinking about like oscilloscopes and Richter scales and audio strips and analog recording, and also the illegibility of psychedelia. Now, for those of you who haven't seen my work, there's these sort of glossy resin surfaces that these objects are embedded in, and then there's often like layers of paint and collage material that float between layers, so there's a shadow play and dimensionality. They don't come through in the photographs, but that's an aspect or a phenomenon that is happening. So then, this is a work I was really embarrassed about. Like, I had started out as basically utilizing geometric minimalism to talk about perception. And then I made this work called Superplant. And it just seemed so gratuitously decorative that I was a little bit embarrassed about it. And what it is it's 6 different psychoactive materials. These are morning glory seeds, which contain an indole related to LSD, tobacco leaves, ephedra stems, hemp leaves, coffee beans, psilocybin mushrooms. And the reason I call it Superplant is, if it ever existed, it would rule the world, I think. But it is basically, it's a hybrid object. But it's also, not only is it just a biological hybrid that couldn't exist in nature, but I think it's also a hybrid between various pictorial traditions. I was specifically thinking about Rajasthani miniatures and the way plants are depicted in this sort of flattened way, and also Shaker Tree of Life that one sees here from America. So I was sort of like conflating lots of different kinds of hybridity. And I also, it also brings to light my own sense of hybridity, my own sense of like how these objects and substances have hybridized with my mind and altered my consciousness. So it's a piece called Utah Saint, made out of ephedra stems that I picked out in the desert. These works are kind of large. That's like 8 by 6 feet. It's a piece called what's it called? Self-annihilation event in hybrid garden. This work here I was living upstate, and I was living next to the Esopus River, and I was working at a barn, and I have to have pretty pristine working conditions for the resin, and no matter what I did, these bugs would get into the garage and land in my resin and screw everything up. So I said, okay, fine. If you can't beat them, join them. So I brought the canvases out into the meadow by the garage. I aimed these big lights at them, and then all these bugs came up off the river, and when they were like storming around the lights, when they reached their apex, I poured this resin onto the surface of the piece, and these bugs stuck and died in random formations, thereby being kind of a portrait of the atmosphere and a reliquary of this sort of collision of nature and technology. And then what I did was, I cut in black around the bugs and then built this sort of this collage where I inverted the narrative. In this case, these like hybrid bugs where I've added pills and leaves and photographic material are now hatching out of this cadaver out into the atmosphere. And so that it turned into something else. And I also did other performative works in my studio. This is a work called Dermal Delivery, or How I Quit Smoking. And what I did was, this is a 6 by 9 foot work, and I gridded it off, and I was wearing nicotine patches and freaking out. And basically, I was thinking about paint as skin. There's this whole idea within art about like oil paint and its fat content and its lusciousness as being the perfect vehicle to describe skin and the body. And so I started playing around with that. And in this case, there were like, I would rip my nicotine patch off, stick it onto the grid every day, and then started like putting in pieces of skin that I would cut out of magazines and Band-Aids and nitroglycerin patches and other fentanyl patches, and then painted bits, lozenges of skin tones. So anyway, so at a certain point, I started thinking, okay, I want my work to take people to these other places. Where do I want to take them to? So I thought, well, I'm going to take them to my favorite places. So this is a work called Ocotillo Nocturne, and it's based on some photographs I took. It's a painting, but it's based on some photographs I took while I was in Joshua Tree, a place, by the way, that inspired Cubic Sky. But I've always wanted to be like a Hudson River School painter. I always wanted to like depict nature in its sublime glory. But for me, nature is always sort of like has within it, a sort of political aspect. There's like genocide and slavery and water rights and political boundaries, and they're all like tied up with this notion of nature. So I thought I would try to like put a sort of a scrim over of other kinds of information that you have to look through to see these sort of nocturnes. So I did a series of these works here. I'll just show them really quickly. A piece called Ripple Trees, Blue Circles. Anyway, you get the idea. This is a piece called Double Landscape. This is a little painting, a little tondo I did of where I painted Pecos National Forest in New Mexico. But the surrounding landscape or the surrounding patterns are of the same landscape, but in topographical map form, and with little saccharin pills dotting it. And so it's like two ways of depicting landscape. So anyway, a lot of the work, a lot of the objects and plant material come out of my backyard. So this is like I live in Williamsburg. I've lived there for like over 30 years. This is my backyard. And there's some datura there. I picked this datura, a little seed pod, right in front of George O'Keeffe's house in Abiquiu, New Mexico, and brought it back home with me. And it's been proliferating in my backyard along with San Pedro cactuses and a bunch of other magic plants. So then what I end up doing is like I'll press all these things into plant presses, and then with the pre-cut collage material and in many cases pills, these become like my sort of palette that I end up working on. This is a piece in progress here. I have a bridge. I usually work on the ground, laying things out. I get up on a ladder. I look down. When I think things are good, I glue them all down. This is a piece here that came out of, this is a piece that's 8 by 20 feet. It's called Gravity's Rainbow. And a lot of the work at this particular point, this was made in 1999. This is where I just took a giant pull chain, that you would turn off and on a light, above light switch with, and I hooked them all together to be 18 feet, and I just would drape it into catenaries and then draw these arcs. and then fill them up with ornament. It's very indebted to the work of, I think, Sola Witt, who conceptual artist, who talked about the mind as the machine that makes art, and that we then just execute it. In my case, there was this mind that was conceiving the work, but then there was like all this intuitive relationship, like how I was going to ornament this skeletal structure. So there's a lot of, it was very inspired, I think, by black Tibetan thangkas. The garland of severed heads that one sees in thangkas, for instance, was very influential on these like severed body parts. But there's also a lot of like paint, some pills, photo collage, real leaves. And I guess with me, when you're looking at my work, it's really hard, I think, sometimes to ascertain the reality of the objects that one sees. It's the paint, the photographs, and the real objects all sort of coexist within the same plane. And that notion of that fuzziness of the reality of the objects is also something that I'm very interested in. This is very similar to Gravity's Rainbow. This is called Echo, Wow, and Flutter, another synesthesia piece. This is it's just basically Gravity's Rainbow turned on its side and then flipped over into a bipolar abstraction. And so with a little bit of Tibetan fire here in the center. Then there's Bird Blast. Just going to go through these really quickly. This I made on a Lazy Susan. I just I built out from the center birds. And these are mostly collage birds and hemp leaves and pills. And then I just sort of worked out until I got to the end of it. So being a frugal guy, I had all these voids left from my field guides. I'm a birder, by the way, as well. And a lot of my hobbies that I have, like gardening, birding, fly fishing, they all end up in surfing, they all end up in my work. I love this notion of the double take. I love the idea of like setting up a premise, a thing as a painting, and then when you get up close, you realize that it's made out of a lot of different kinds of things. And in this case, I made with these voids, I started putting this polar fleece and Gore-Tex outerwear garments from Land's End catalogs to try to roughly emulate the shape or the anatomy of the birds, so that when you see them from across the room, you just think they're just regular like Audubons or field guides, and then you get up close, you see the zippers and the buttons and stuff. But also, it was a way of me conflating two ways of seeing nature or using nature. We're walking around naming it with our books, and we're dressed in our petrochemical-based, Gore-Tex polar fleece. And then also maybe ask the question of like, well, what's so wrong that the birds have to wear those outfits? But so I guess, a lot of what I had to deal with growing up in the 70s is the sort of the rubble of utopianism. Basically I grew up pretty close to Laguna Beach, and I got to watch, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love and Timothy Leary get arrested and bailed out by the Black Panthers, and I got to watch the sort of fallout of the 60s, and I started thinking about how this notion, the rubble of utopianism, was also something that, as artists, we also deal with. I mean, with the futurists, eventually morphed into fascists, or the idea of like Malevich being co-opted by Stalin and becoming a Stalinist, and that sort of legacy of failure and walking through the rubble of this world that I was trying to figure out what to do with, was something, trying to find things worth saving was a real question for me. This is a work called New Jerusalem, and it looks like a happy, peaceful little valley, but this is like, these are all basically separatist structures from American history. The Unabomber cabin, Charles Manson's hideout, Drop City commune, Aryan Nations compound, Mormon polygamous houses. You get the idea, Shaker meeting halls. So instead of like being a happy little beautiful town of peace and quiet, it's this town of hate and suspicion. And I started thinking about this notion of, of New Jerusalem, this new Eden, this American experiment, and for me, landscape became this idea of the imposition of ideology onto nature, and having had lived in Vermont, had been with a bunch of back to lander types, this was just really interesting to me. So we'll flip around here. We'll go through some stuff. This is a work called Untitled Expulsion. It's sort of based on Masaccio's expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. That's sort of the basic myth that deals with our separation from Eden and the utopic thrust of history that is within its wake. In this case, let's see here. In this case, that right there is a little like psilocybin mushroom. I decided to had the hubris to try to depict God in this work here. So this is a variety of works here that were inspired directly by Tibetan tankas. There's a piece called Breathing Head. And it was also, I would say, very much inspired by the folk anthology by Harry Smith, all these sort of songs in the American Songbook about death and the cosmic sublime, and I was dealing a lot with reading a lot with I was listening a lot to Harry Smith at the time. This is called Field Guides. This could be a guy from New Jerusalem commune there, working away. Toytopia, Expecting to Fly. And this work is also very indebted to the work of Giuseppe Arcimboldo, a guy who was who operated in the 1500s in Italy in the Renaissance. This is a piece called Airborne Event. This was very much based on, I was reading Don DeLillo's White Noise, where he talks about a toxic airborne event. And then, so I was making this sort of chemical cloud that was going to all be like hexagons. But then at a certain point, I just veered off and started thinking about alien space abduction and the assumption of the Virgin Mary into heaven. And there you have it. So anyway, I went and segued from people, and these birds now became surrogates for human activity. So I'm just going to show you a few of these. These are all sort of made out of like cut flowers and various other things. This is like, this snake is made out of literally hundreds of snakes that I've cut together to make a mega snake. And this is called Migrant Fruit Thugs. Those are, one of the things that's happened in my work is I'm no longer using drugs in my work, and though I still use leaves and sometimes psychoactively, many of the leaves I use now are not. I sort of feel like that the work itself, as it's gained sort of power with a sort of a psychedelic aesthetic, it's almost like the work itself has consumed its own drugs and they no longer need to be there. And so in this case, these are fig leaves from my backyard. And this was sort of based on an event where migration was coming through. I saw a bird eating my figs. I was going to chase it off because I thought it was a starling, and it turned out to be a red-breasted grosbeak, which is very cool. So I let it eat my figs, and that became that. So that's also like 8 by 6.5 feet. And these works are quite heavy, I might add. So we're just sort of moving through we got here a raven. I like this one here only because it seems so Oedipal, and I mean it's sort of it is, but I really enjoy this sort of Darwinism of the object. So is that bird feeding his baby snake, or is the baby snake killing him? This is the work me and my son worked on together. He's very much of a materialist, and so he's really into gemstones. So we built this work together. A lot of times I'll be in my studio and I'll be rubbing my eyeballs, and you get these phosphenes that like flick around, and I would try to draw them really quickly before they would fade away. So just going to run through here really quickly. This is a work that called Abductor. This was made while channeling Katrina. And I was thinking about the tornadoes, the waterspouts that were coming up. And anyway, there you go. I went back to, I'm going to end with this piece here. This is called Night Music for Raptors. And it's hundreds of bird's eyes put together to make an owl, but they're also could be seen as two turntables as seen from above, but it can also, and the little dots could be seen as the stars at the night, and the hooting of the owls, and I think that's it. Thank you.
Fred Tomaselli, thank you so much. Thank you for your beautiful work. Thank you for that beautiful work. So, who have some questions?
Hi.
Thank you so much for sharing your work. It's beautiful. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the relationship that you have with sort of the otherness that is, part of the creative process, but is also part of the psychedelic process or psychedelic experience. Sort of
the
that
otherness?
Like the interaction with that spirit world. If you see parallels to the psychedelic experience, like I see you're using materials that are from the psychedelic experience, but also like wondering if you have sort of communication with that entity that is similar to when you are experiencing psychedelics.
Sure. For me, the psychedelic experience has been one of unbounded mystery. Part of me has a materialist look at it, like that these are chemicals that are interacting with the brain, and then part of me feels that this is opening up a parallel reality to other dimensions, towards a very spiritual sort of reality. And either way you look at it, it's still amazing. It's still a mystery to me. Like, even if it is just chemicals, even if it is just a brain organ that's just being, that serotonin receptors going loco, even if it's that, it still blows my mind. And for me, that question about how it alters consciousness and what it's doing. That underlying question for me can never really fully be answered, and that's what keeps me going back to that experience to try to tease out what it means. So yeah, I mean, there's this, I'm of two minds of it, and I think I'm taking both those minds and I'm putting it in there. I think a lot of my work has ideological warfare going on inside of it anyway. So, because of my relationship to conceptual art doesn't mean that I have to dislike Asian art, ancient Asian art, or Renaissance art. And so, for me, these polarities that I bounce between, I feel they can never really fully be resolved, and that's why I find it interesting as a subject for making art.
Another question over there.
I was wondering if you could talk at all about if you use psychedelics during the creative process, and if basically have any of these been inspired while you were in altered states, or do you use heightened states to work out the ideas of your paintings?
The first part of my work up to 1997, I've had sporadic periods where I've investigated or dipped back into psychedelia or psychedelic experience. Right after punk rock broke, I started dropping a lot of acid around 1980, And I think maybe that became the impetus for where I ended up today. But I also did a whole bunch in the mid-90s before the birth of my son. And that's probably like I had that work, Double Landscape, for instance, was done right around that time when I was living in upstate New York. But I haven't really done any psychedelics since. But now that my son's off to college, I don't know. It does get a little weird in my studio because when you're using I will talk about drug use a little bit. When you are using marijuana and you're laying it out on your pieces and you're smoking the same pot that you're laying out, this idea of the feedback loop between you and the objects that artists talk about that, I mean, that's an amazing feedback loop where the objects themselves are speaking from inside your own brain, so it can get a little funny in the studio. So, but that's about it for me. It's mostly coffee, I mostly just drink a lot of coffee.
Another question.
For those of us living in a hyper-industrialized urban environment, how can we care more about the environment, sustainability, short of doing more mushrooms?
How can we care more about the environment?
Yeah, how can we care more about environmental sustainability and maybe working with organizations and governments to have more environmental protections?
Dropping acids totally put me in touch with nature in a way that I never could have imagined. And it's my deep belief that the ecology movement, kind of came about primarily by a bunch of people who had a feeling of oneness with nature, and so that really had elevated my relationship to nature and my desire to protect it. But I don't really know. I don't even know if I'm not really advocating for any kind of politics within my own work, and I don't even know if I'm answering your question. But what I am advocating for is the sense of that the world is this amazing, profuse, gorgeous, complicated thing full of organisms that are like interacting with one another, and it's just so beautiful, and I want to put that in my work. And I just want to put that in my work, and I really feel that there was something that happened with my relationship with psychedelic drugs that was a catalyst, if you will, for something like that to happen within me.
Another question? Over there.
Fred, two questions. How old was your son when the two of you worked on that piece together? And again, I love your art. Have you turned any of it into an affordable medium, like a poster or something like that, where I can acquire it? The average person doesn't have the money to.
Yeah, my son is 18. He's going to become a computer engineer and work for an evil corporation, and I love him very much. And there's a lot of books that are out on my work, including, I didn't even get to talk about the New York Times projects that I've been doing for the last 12 years. And there are posters out there in the world. I think MoMA has a poster that you could buy from their gift shop. And if you wait, so there's stuff out there in the world. So I think there's even a puzzle I just made, which is like so ridiculously hard that I don't know if anybody could ever make it. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost a joke.
Other questions?
Hi.
Hi.
I love your work too.
Thanks.
I think it's really interesting. So I've never really done psychedelics, but I felt like the world is wonderful. and it's great.
You can get there that way too.
Yeah. Yeah, and
It's
like,
just a shortcut, that's all.
yeah, I think so too. And but I have a hard time like feeling like that all the time.
What's that?
Like I have a hard time feeling like life is great all the time. But it,
I agree
like,
with you.
But listening to you made me like feel like you seem to experience more of life in the greater side. So I was wondering, what's your strategy?
What's my what?
Strategy.
My strategy? Oh, I don't know. I'm really, really lucky person. I get to make art full time. I got a house with a garden. I'm, happily married. Have a beautiful son, and I have a really great life. And I grew up working class, oldest of 6 kids, struggling immigrant parents, the whole bit. So I never felt entitled to the life I have. It's like it blows my mind that I have it, and so I'm just really thankful for it. So there's no reason to be, a jerk about it, complain about it. I love my life. Very lucky.
For the work that contains Schedule 1 drugs, do you ever have any trouble shipping it around the world for shows? Does the DEA ever bug you or at your studio? Or?
It's funny. Legality has been an issue since the get-go, and it was never my intention to be transgressive on purpose. I was just using the objects that were a natural part of my life, the detritus of my life, and just using them in a way that I felt was really obvious. That being said, at a certain point, that did become something of an issue, and my work was all confiscated in France for an exhibition, and sent to Rouen, where it was in this holding area with diseased chickens and fake Louis Vuitton bags and stuff. And we did get the Minister of Culture, Jacques Lang, to release my work. And it turned out, though, that it wasn't about Schedule 1 drugs. It turned out that the French were trying to protect their pharmaceutical industry, and that they thought I was trying to export in this like elaborate ruse American drugs into France. So anyway, it was weird. But I try to show my work in crime-plagued cities where the cops have something else to do other than arrest paintings. And for the most part, I haven't had any trouble. But, I've tried to keep, I'm in the ghetto of the art world. Who cares? You know what I mean? It's like just a small little thing. I just do my stuff, and so far, so good. And I haven't really made a big deal about it. So far. And I'm not really even making work with drugs anymore, so I guess I dodged that bullet.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Fred.